It was a morning like any other in the bustling financial district of the city. Inside the spacious bank lobby, customers formed winding lines, waiting their turn to perform routine transactions. Amidst the crowd, Jake, a mere 15 years old, but already bearing the seriousness of a medical student, waited patiently to deposit his scholarship check. Suddenly, an unexpected tension cut through the usual murmur of the place. A tall man, wearing a black hood that barely concealed his agitation, abruptly entered and headed to the cashier. His movements were nervous, his hands trembling as he handed a threatening note to the teller behind the counter. Without losing a second, Jake, who had a keen perception for emergency situations due to his first aid training, sensed the imminent danger. He watched as the robber began brandishing a weapon, instigating a silent panic among those present. Beside him, a middle-aged woman, whom he would later recognize as Elizabeth, clutched her purse tightly, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered almost inaudibly, "My God, he's going to shoot." Jake felt adrenaline surge through his veins. With a calm surprising for his age, he stealthily approached the robber. With a quick and precise movement, characteristic of someone used to dealing with chaos, he grabbed the man's arm, twisting it back and causing the gun to fall to the ground with a metallic clatter. "Don't do anything stupid," Jake whispered firmly into the robber's ear, now twisted in pain and surprise. The bank's security guards, alerted by the commotion, quickly intervened, subduing the robber while Jake stepped back, trying to process what had just happened. Elizabeth, still trembling, looked at him with a mixture of relief and admiration. You saved us all," she murmured, holding Jake's arm with gratitude. "How can I thank you?" Jake, still under the effect of adrenaline, just smiled shyly and helped her to a seat. "I was in the right place at the right time," he responded modestly. As the police arrived and the situation began to calm down, the bank's security cameras, which had recorded every moment of the intervention, captured Jake's bravery. Within hours, the video of the young medical student stopping a bank robbery circulated on social media and news outlets, transforming an impulsive act of courage into a viral phenomenon. With the image of Jake holding the criminal's arm dominating screens and hearts, no one could foresee the repercussions this moment would bring for the young hero, whose life was about to change radically. At the height of the media frenzy surrounding Jake's brave intervention during the bank robbery, the atmosphere at the prestigious medical school where he studied became palpably tense. News that one of its students had acted so decisively in a public and potentially dangerous situation quickly reached the administration's corridors and conference rooms. Seated in an austere room with windows overlooking the serene campus, the board of directors convened in an emergency session. The dean, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, drew everyone's attention with a wave of his hand. "We need to consider the implications of Jake's actions," he began, his voice reflecting a mixture of concern and disapproval. Though heroic, his behavior in a public place, especially in such a volatile situation, raises serious questions about the judgment and image we wish to project. An ethics professor, always thoughtful, intervened. "It's undeniable that he saved lives, but at the same time, by acting as he did, he exposed the institution to a type of publicity we may not desire. The risk was immense, and he could have been seriously injured." Opinions on the board were divided. Some saw Jake as a model of courage and altruism, while others, influenced by concerns about liability and institutional reputation, pondered the potential negative repercussions. Finally, the dean concluded, "After careful deliberation, and considering all aspects, we have made the difficult decision to expel Jake. We cannot endorse this type of risky behavior. It's a matter of policy and maintaining the prestige of our institution." The decision was formalized in a harsh letter, drafted with a cold tone of administrative formality. Jake received the notification at his small home, where he had lived alone since starting his studies. The envelope, heavy in his hands, seemed to carry a weight greater than the paper itself. Slightly trembling, Jake broke the seal and read the words that would irrevocably change the course of his life. "We regret to inform you that, due to your involvement in a public safety incident." The letter detailed the board's decision and the reasons behind it, each word a blow to his aspirations. Desolate, Jake sat down, the letter slipping from his hands. he murmured to himself in an almost inaudible whisper, "All I wanted was to help, and now it's all over." His mother, on the phone, tried to offer comfort. "Jake, dear, you did what you thought was right. We'll find a way to deal with this. You can still be a doctor. We'll find another school, another path." However, Jake felt as if a door had slammed shut before him, and the words of comfort sounded distant and hollow. He spent the night sleepless, pondering his future, now uncertain and nebulous. As he struggled to find some meaning in the twists of his life, Jake began to question whether his impulsive decision had truly been wise. The hours of the early morning dragged slowly on, and the sun began to illuminate the sky with the first signs of a new day, which would bring with it the challenge of starting anew, somehow, somewhere. As dawn broke, tinting the sky with a soft orange hue, Jake contemplated his new reality. With the expulsion decision in hand, he felt as if he had been torn from his chosen path, forced to tread unfamiliar and barren ground. That morning, after a night of little hope, Jake decided he could not let his passion for medicine be completely extinguished by the bureaucracy and fear of a college. He knew he still wanted to make a difference, still wanted to save lives. And it was with this resilient spirit that he began to look for alternatives. "What are you going to do now, Jake?" his mother asked, worried, during a tense breakfast. The dark circles under her eyes showed that it had also been a long night for her. "I'm going to find another way to help people, Mom. Maybe not as a doctor, not for now, but I'll keep going," Jake replied, more to himself than to her, the determination in his voice trying to mask the uncertainty he felt inside. In the following days, Jake scoured job listings, looking for something that could align his medical education with the need to start working immediately. It was then that he came across a job opening for a paramedic. It wasn't the traditional medicine he dreamed of practicing, but it was close enough, and it was an opportunity to put his skills to use, helping others in critical moments. During the interview, the head of emergency services, a robust man named Mr. Harrison, scrutinized him with a critical eye. "You look young, and I see here you were expelled from medical school. Why?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jake explained the incident, hiding nothing, his honesty tinged with a slight bitterness. "I just did what I thought I had to do to save someone in danger. I never thought it would cost me everything." Mr. Harrison observed him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You know, emergency medicine needs people who can make quick decisions under pressure. I think you could fit in well here." And so, Jake began his training as a paramedic. In the months that followed, he immersed himself in the work, learning to navigate the city streets in an ambulance, treating everything from minor injuries to life-or-death emergencies. Each call was a quickened heartbeat in his chest, each patient a reminder of why he had chosen the path of medicine. Jake adapted to the routine with a mix of fervor and sobriety, finding a new purpose in the ambulance sirens and the tearful thanks of strangers he helped. He didn't know if he would ever return to medical school, but for now, he was where he was needed, doing what he could to make a difference. As the sun set after another day of work, bringing with it the promise of a brief rest before another night of calls, Jake felt grateful to have found a way forward. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. After all, his journey was just beginning, and the next chapter promised to be as intense as the ones that had already passed. As the years passed, Jake established himself in his career as a paramedic, each day bringing new challenges and personal victories. However, an unexpected invitation to attend a community health event in a beautiful city park would rekindle memories of a past he thought he had left behind. It was a clear and sunny day, with colorful tents scattered throughout the park, where health professionals offered free screenings and wellness talks. Jake was there to demonstrate first aid techniques. He adjusted his uniform and checked the materials on his table, preparing for a demonstration when a familiar voice called his name. "Jake?" The question was loaded with cautious hesitation. Turning around, Jake saw a distinguished-looking woman wearing an elegant suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Her face seemed strangely familiar to him, but it was the expression of recognition mixed with surprise that brought the memory to the surface. "Elizabeth?" he responded, his heart beating a little faster. "Is that you?" Elizabeth smiled, a smile that couldn't hide a certain melancholy. "Yes, it's me. Jake, I didn't expect to see you here." They approached each other, an air of hesitation floating between them. The initially warm reunion gave way to a deeper conversation as they moved away from the noisy tents to a quieter area of the park, under the shade of some trees. "You seem to be doing well," Jake commented, trying to ease the tension. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes shifting to the briefcase she held as if it were a shield. "Yes, I'm a lawyer now. But Jake, I need to tell you, that day at the bank, it changed my life in ways I never imagined." Jake watched as she took a breath, clearly struggling to articulate her next words. "After the robbery, my personal and professional life fell apart. I went through a difficult divorce and my career as a banker ended. It all became too much for me." Jake's heart tightened upon hearing her words. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I never meant to." She raised a hand, gently interrupting him. "I know, Jake. You acted to save people that day. But for a while, I resented you. I even thought about suing you. Can you believe it? I was desperate, looking for someone to blame." Jake remained silent, her words bringing a mix of sadness and relief at finally understanding the burden she had carried. "But I saw the news about how you were treated by the college, and I realized that you were also a victim of terrible circumstances. Over time, my resentment gave way to something else, a need to seek justice, not just for me, but for you as well." Elizabeth's confession brought a new understanding between them. As they talked, the shadows of the trees lengthened, and the event continued around them, unaware of the reunion that might once again change the course of their lives. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Jake and Elizabeth continued their conversation, now sitting on a bench away from the other activities of the event. The setting seemed particularly designed for deep confessions, with the gentle murmur of a nearby fountain and the occasional song of a bird. Elizabeth looked at Jake, her expression a mix of regret and resolution. "Jake, when everything fell apart after the robbery, I felt completely lost. My professional life was ruined, and my marriage couldn't withstand the ensuing tension." Jake listened intently, each of her words adding weight to the silence forming between them. "I was so desperate, so angry with everything and everyone, that for a moment I considered suing you. I thought that somehow, if you hadn't intervened, my life would have continued on its normal course." She paused, looking at her trembling hands. "I know it sounds terrible now, and I'm sorry for having thought that way." Jake, feeling a pang in his heart, simply nodded, understanding the complexity of her emotions. "I understand, Elizabeth. That day changed all of our lives in unexpected ways." Elizabeth continued, her voice steadier now, though still laden with emotion. "But over time I started seeing the news about you, how you were treated by the college, and how you didn't give up, how you became a dedicated paramedic. And that changed the way I saw the situation." She sighed, seeming to lift a weight off her shoulders. "Seeing you continue to help people despite everything made me realize that what you did that day was incredibly brave and selfless. It wasn't you who ruined my life. It was circumstances that neither of us could have foreseen." Jake felt a mix of relief and sadness, knowing that the scars of that day were still felt by both. "Elizabeth, I truly feel for all the hardships you faced." She gently touched his arm, a gesture of comfort and gratitude. "I know, Jake, and I'm grateful for everything you've done. I just wanted you to know that I abandoned any thoughts of legal action a long time ago. Not only because I saw how good a person you are, but also because I found the strength to rebuild my life, just like you did." Their conversation, though laden with painful revelations, brought a new level of understanding and mutual respect. As the sky shifted from golden to the deep blue of twilight, they knew that their paths, although marked by a traumatic event, were now intertwining in a way that could lead to a new beginning for both. As they rose from the bench, preparing to leave the park, Elizabeth looked at Jake with a determined expression. "You know, Jake, maybe there is something we can do together, something that can truly put all this behind us and make an even greater difference." Curious and intrigued by her suggestion, Jake agreed. "I'm listening, Elizabeth. What do you have in mind?" As they walked toward the park's exit, Elizabeth began to outline her plan. A plan that could not only heal their old wounds, but also pave the way for a future where they could continue to make a difference together. The conversation, full of possibilities, promised to shape the course of their lives in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky as Jake and Elizabeth walked side by side, leaving behind the park and the shadows of the trees. The air was crisp, full of possibilities, as they discussed a plan that could change not only their lives, but also those of many others who had faced similar injustices. "Jake, have you ever thought about fighting for your readmission to medical school?" Elizabeth asked, her tone serious but encouraging. "With everything I've learned as a lawyer, I could help you build a case. We could expose not just the injustice of your expulsion, but also fight for broader changes in the university's policies." Jake stopped, looking at her with a mix of surprise and hope. "Do you really think it's possible? After all these years?" "I not only think it's possible, but I think it's necessary," Elizabeth replied with conviction. "Your story is proof that the system failed. It's not just about you, it's about all the students who might be unfairly penalized in the future." Elizabeth's words ignited a flame of determination in Jake. He had always felt powerless against the vast administrative machinery of the college, but with Elizabeth by his side, things seemed different. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared," Jake admitted, his eyes fixed on hers. "But you're right. If there's a chance to do this, then we should try." "Great," Elizabeth said, a smile of approval forming on her lips. "Let's start by reviewing all the details of your case, collecting all the evidence we can, and building a solid argument. I'll need everything you can remember, all the documents you still have." In the following days, they met several times, delving into documents, emails, and old records. Elizabeth meticulously organized everything, creating a timeline of events and highlighting inconsistencies and flaws in the college's decision. As they worked, their relationship deepened, strengthened by their shared dedication to a common cause. Conversations about the case often veered into sharing personal stories, laughter, and even meals shared at cafes near Elizabeth's office, where papers and laptops were always present. "You know, I never imagined that something as horrible as that expulsion could lead to something so positive," Jake commented one afternoon, watching Elizabeth organize another stack of documents. "Sometimes, the worst experiences lead us to the best destinations," she replied, looking up at him with a smile. "And regardless of the outcome, I'm glad to be on this journey with you." With the plan in action and the alliance forged, they were ready to face the next big challenge, bringing Jake's case to trial. As they prepared for this stage, they knew that together they formed a formidable team, ready to fight not only for justice for Jake, but also to set a precedent that could protect future students from suffering the same unjust fate. Dawn brought a pale light over the city as Jake and Elizabeth arrived at the courthouse, carrying folders stuffed with meticulously prepared documents for the legal battle ahead. They had spent months reviewing every detail, every college policy, and every correspondence Jake had exchanged with the administration. Now, it was time to put their work to the test. "Are you ready for this?" Elizabeth asked, giving a final glance at the papers in her hands before entering the courtroom. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied with a tense smile. "Thanks to you, I feel we have a real chance." They were greeted by a stuffy, crowded corridor full of spectators, journalists, and other students who had faced or feared facing similar situations. Their presence there was a silent reminder of what was at stake. The session began with the judge calling the case and Elizabeth delivering a powerful opening statement. "This case is about more than the unjust expulsion of a promising student. It is about the integrity of an institution that should support, not punish, courage and altruism," she argued, her voice resonating in the attentive silence of the room. As the proceedings unfolded, Jake and Elizabeth faced an army of lawyers hired by the college, each presenting their version of the facts, attempting to paint Jake as a reckless young man whose actions could have endangered others. But Elizabeth was prepared, countering each point with concrete evidence and testimonies that supported Jake's account. It was during a particularly tense testimony from a member of the college board that a crucial piece of the puzzle came to light. Pressed by Elizabeth about his motivations for supporting Jake's expulsion, the board member hesitated, his evasive answers until finally the truth emerged. "I admit there were personal concerns involved," the board member confessed under oath. "My affiliation with the security company hired by the bank was known to few. An investigation into the robbery could have brought to light connections we preferred to keep secret." The room fell silent as the implication of these words sank in. Elizabeth seized the moment, emphasizing how this conflict of interest had corrupted the college's decision-making process. "This is the crux of the issue," she said, addressing the judge. "A student was sacrificed to protect personal interests, not because he posed any real risk." With the revelation of this conflict of interest, Jake's case gained new momentum. Additional documents were requested, and more witnesses were called. The college began to see the possibility of a humiliating and public defeat, and the tension within the defense team was palpable. As the sun set at the end of that long and exhausting day, Jake and Elizabeth left the courthouse, knowing they had turned the tide in their favor. But the battle was far from over. They knew the upcoming sessions would be crucial, and the college would do everything in its power to protect its reputation. They prepared to continue the fight, bolstered by the progress they had made, but aware of the challenges still to come. As they walked side by side, a sense of solidified camaraderie between them. The legal battle they faced now seemed less of a burden and more of a shared mission, a joint effort to demand justice and perhaps even inspire significant change. As Jake's case progressed, the courtroom sessions became increasingly charged with tension and revelations. Following the surprising confession from the board member at the last hearing, Elizabeth and Jake began to focus on the connection between the college and the security company, realizing that this could be the key to unraveling the entire plot that led to Jake's unjust expulsion. On a rainy afternoon, while reviewing documents at a cafe near Elizabeth's office, she pointed to a set of emails they had obtained through a court order. "Look at this, Jake," she said, her voice low and serious. "These emails between the board member and the director of the security company show regular communication months before the bank robbery." Jake leaned in to look. The messages were carefully coded, but the context was clear. There was a constant concern with protecting the company's image and discussions about how a lawsuit could expose significant security flaws at the bank. "This is not just a coincidence. It's deliberate manipulation," Elizabeth stated, marking the emails with yellow post-its. This board member used his position to influence the college, fearing that any investigation into the robbery would highlight security incompetence, something that would directly affect his financial interests. Armed with this new evidence, they prepared a detailed dossier to present at the next hearing. Elizabeth planned to call the director of the security company as a witness, hoping that under oath he would reveal more about the relationship between the company and the board member. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was particularly crowded. News of the latest discoveries had spread, attracting the attention of the media and student activists, all eager for justice. When the director was called to testify, Elizabeth was direct in her questioning. "Mr. Dalton, what was the nature of your relationship with board member Stevens prior to the robbery at the bank where your company provided security services?" The director hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under Elizabeth's penetrating gaze and the expectant murmur of the room. We had a professional relationship. I consulted him on security issues given his expertise," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "It wasn't just professional, it was personally advantageous for both of you, correct?" Elizabeth pressed, showing him a copy of the emails. "These communications suggest that you and board member Stevens were trying to protect your business interests, influencing academic decisions that had nothing to do with the bank's security." The director finally yielded under the pressure, admitting that there were concerns about how a lawsuit could negatively affect the company, and by extension, his relationship with the board member. "Yes, we were worried about the repercussions. That's why we discussed the possible consequences." With this confession, Jake's case gained substantial momentum. The college's lawyers requested a recess, clearly shaken by the direction the proceedings were taking. As the judge granted the break, Elizabeth and Jake exchanged looks of triumph mixed with disbelief. They had succeeded in exposing a significant part of the web of influence and corruption that led to Jake's expulsion. Knowing that the next step would be crucial, they prepared to consolidate their case, anticipating the resistance they would face, but now more confident than ever that the truth would prevail. With this newfound energy, they began planning the next phase of the legal battle, aware that the upcoming revelations could change everything once again. After the explosive testimony in court, Elizabeth and Jake knew they had a story that needed to be shared beyond the courthouse walls. The truth about the manipulation and conflicts of interest could not only turn the tide in Jake's favor, but also alert society to systemic failures that could affect other students. The day after the revelation, Elizabeth called a press conference, choosing a small auditorium near the college campus. The atmosphere was charged with tension and expectation as journalists from various outlets gathered, microphones and cameras positioned to capture every word. "Thank you all for being here today," Elizabeth began, her firm and clear tone echoing through the crowded space. "We are here to discuss a case that, while personal, reflects broader problems in our educational and justice systems." She then detailed the discoveries, exposing the emails and confessions obtained, describing how an influential board member used his position to protect private interests at the expense of a promising student. This is not just the story of an unjust expulsion. It is an example of how personal interests can corrupt institutions that should be serving the common good, declared Elizabeth. Beside her, Jake shared his personal experience, his voice full of emotion, but also strength. "I lost years of my education and almost lost faith in the system that should have supported me. But what we are fighting here is bigger than just one case. It's about ensuring that this doesn't happen again to any other student." Jake's words resonated with many in attendance, and camera flashes illuminated his determined face as he spoke. Social media quickly echoed the details of the conference, and soon the story was being widely shared, sparking debates and discussions online. Public pressure began to mount as students and alumni of the college initiated protests, demanding transparency and changes in the institution's policies. Posters with phrases supporting Jake and criticizing the college administration could be seen on the lawns and entrances of the campus. Under the weight of this growing public pressure, the college administration called an emergency meeting. The halls of the administrative building buzzed with tense conversations as board members gathered to discuss Jake's case and the implications of the revelations made. "We are at a crossroads," commented one of the deans during the meeting, looking at the other members, all aware of the public's eyes on them. "We need to reconsider not only Jake's situation, but also how we handle governance and transparency issues. We cannot ignore the public outcry." As the college struggled to formulate a response, Jake and Elizabeth prepared for the next round of legal battles, bolstered by the support they now had, not only from the local community, but from people across the country who were watching closely. Aware that they had sparked significant change, they reviewed their plans for the next hearing, ready to use public pressure as a catalyst for true and lasting justice. The next phase of the fight promised to be as intense as the revelations already made. But now, with the community's support, Jake and Elizabeth felt they were not just fighting for a case, but leading a movement. The big day of the final trial had arrived, marking the climax of Jake's long battle to clear his name and expose the system's flaws that had wronged him. The courtroom was packed, with every seat occupied by journalists, students, professors, and interested citizens, all eager to witness the unfolding events. Elizabeth, always calm, but especially intense today, reviewed her notes one last time before the judge entered the room. Jake, sitting beside her, felt a mix of nervousness and determination. "We're ready for this, Jake. Let's bring the truth to light," she whispered, offering him an encouraging smile. When the judge entered and everyone rose, the ensuing silence was almost palpable. "Please be seated. We will proceed with this crucial case," announced the judge, a middle-aged man with a grave expression. The first to testify was the dean of the college, who tried to justify Jake's expulsion by citing concerns for student safety and well-being. Under Elizabeth's questioning, however, his answers began to seem less certain. "So you are saying the decision was solely based on Jake's act of heroism, with no external influence?" Elizabeth pressed, the intensity of her voice adding weight to her words. "Yes, it was an independent decision," the dean replied, avoiding Elizabeth's gaze. "Interesting," Elizabeth retorted as she began unfolding a series of printed emails and other documents clearly indicating communications between the dean and the board member involved with the security company. "Then how do you explain these emails between you and Mr. Stevens, discussing the implications of the incident long before any disciplinary action was taken against Jake?" The dean's face paled as the documents circulated around the room, generating murmurs among the audience. The evidence was clear and incriminating, and his hesitation only served to strengthen Jake's case. After the dean's testimony, Elizabeth called an academic ethics expert to the stand, who testified about the irregularities in Jake's process, highlighting the lack of fair and transparent procedure. The academic integrity was clearly compromised in this case. The expert declared, his words reinforcing the injustice Jake had suffered. As the trial progressed, the truth about the manipulations and conflicts of interest within the College Board became undeniable. The public in the courtroom was clearly impacted by the revelations, and expressions of shock and indignation were evident. When the last testimony was given and the closing arguments made, the judge retired to deliberate, leaving a courtroom in suspense. Jake and Elizabeth exchanged looks of hope mixed with anxiety, knowing they had done everything in their power to reveal the truth. As they waited for the decision, the impact of the trial was already being felt, with public opinion clearly leaning in Jake's favor. Regardless of the outcome, they knew they had initiated an important movement for change and justice. Preparing for what was to come, Elizabeth reviewed her notes for the next step in her strategy, knowing that the judge's verdict, soon to be announced, would be just the beginning of what they hoped would be a profound reform in how the college treated its students. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone awaited the judge's return. The silence was broken by the sound of the doors opening, and the judge entered with a serious expression, carrying the weight of the decisions he was about to announce. "All rise," said the bailiff, and as one, everyone stood. The judge sat down, organized his papers, and looked around the room, pausing before he began to speak. "This case has presented us not only with a question of justice for an individual, but also with an opportunity to reflect on the principles that govern our educational institutions and their responsibility to the community," the judge began, his firm voice echoing through the space. "After careful consideration of the evidence presented and the testimonies heard, we have reached a decision." Jake held Elizabeth's hand, his anxiety almost palpable. Elizabeth, maintaining her professional composure, gave him a reassuring squeeze, her gaze fixed on the judge. "The court concludes that the expulsion of Mr. Jacob Mills from medical school was not based on a fair assessment of his actions, but was influenced by conflicts of interest that compromised the integrity of the disciplinary process," declared the judge. "Therefore, we order the immediate readmission of Mr. Mills to the institution and a complete review of the expulsion policies to ensure that such injustice does not happen again." A murmur of approval swept through the room, and some applause was heard before being quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Jake felt a wave of relief and joy flood his being, his emotions mixed with an almost surreal sense of victory. He looked at Elizabeth, whose eyes shone with tears of happiness and pride. "We did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Yes, we did," she replied, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "You deserved every moment of this victory, Jake." As they left the courtroom, embraced and accompanied by the applause of friends, family, and supporters, Jake felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The journalists' cameras captured every moment, and they knew their stories would be news the next morning. The victory in court was not only a personal redemption for Jake, it was a sign of possible change within a system many felt was untouchable. In the days that followed, as the college worked on revising its policies, Jake and Elizabeth were invited to participate in panels and discussions, sharing their story and the lessons learned. The struggle had been long and challenging, but justice had finally prevailed, not only for Jake, but also as a precedent for future students who might one day face similar challenges. Now, as they prepared for the next stages of their lives, with the medical school ready to welcome Jake back, they knew that this victory was just the beginning of new challenges and new opportunities. The medical school campus, which once represented a place of abrupt interruption and injustice in Jake's life, had now transformed into a setting of triumph and new beginnings. On his first day back, the leaves on the trees swayed gently in the fresh autumn breeze, a reminder of life's constant changes and renewals. Walking through the familiar corridors, Jake felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. The aura of the place seemed different now, laden with the weight of his victory and the expectations of his future. As he entered the classroom, his classmates, some of whom had participated in the protests supporting him, greeted him with applause and warm congratulations. The acknowledgement from his peers was a sweet validation of his struggle and resilience. "It's good to have you back, Jake," said one of his closest friends, patting him on the back with a smile. "I'm happy to be back," Jake replied, his smile reflecting genuine happiness. Sitting in his usual seat, he opened his notebook, ready to absorb the knowledge that had been unjustly denied to him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, who had accompanied Jake to the entrance of the college, watched from a distance, a sense of accomplishment filling her heart. She had fought tirelessly alongside Jake, and seeing him resume his path brought a deep feeling of satisfaction and contentment. Later that day, they met at a cafe near the campus to celebrate. "You don't know how much it means to me to be back here, and it's all thanks to you, Elizabeth," Jake said, looking at her with evident gratitude in his eyes. Elizabeth smiled, modestly. "It was your courage that brought us here, Jake. I just did what any good friend and lawyer would do. I hope that, above all, we can continue to be great friends, no matter where our careers take us," Jake said, raising his cup in a toast. "No doubt, Jake. Friends forever," Elizabeth agreed, clinking her cup with his. The conversation flowed freely between them, discussing future plans and the changes they hoped to see at the college as a result of their struggle. They talked about the revision of expulsion policies, hopeful that their actions would lead to a more just and transparent academic environment. As the afternoon gave way to evening, Jake and Elizabeth said their goodbyes, each heading to their respective responsibilities with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. They knew their lives were intertwined by an experience that had shaped them both in unimaginable ways, and that their friendship was a pillar of continuous support. With the university now welcoming Jake back, and the lessons learned from adversity still fresh in his mind, he was ready to face the academic challenges ahead, while Elizabeth continued her legal career, driven by the justice they had achieved together. This new chapter for both was just beginning, promising growth, challenges, and most importantly, the continuation of a friendship that had proven to be unbreakable. As autumn progressed, the university campus trees displayed a vibrant array of colors, an inspiring backdrop that perfectly aligned with Jake and Elizabeth's new beginnings. After their victory in court and Jake's triumphant return to his studies, both felt a growing urge to channel their experience into something that could benefit others. One clear afternoon, as they walked along paths lined with golden and red trees, Elizabeth shared an idea that had been forming in her mind. "Jake, I've been thinking about how we can turn our experience into something lasting, something that can truly make a difference." Jake, who had been contemplative, turned his gaze to her, intrigued. "What do you have in mind? How about we create a scholarship fund? A fund aimed at supporting students who, like you, face adversity not because of wrong choices, but for doing what's right," Elizabeth proposed, her eyes shining with the possibility of turning struggle into hope. The idea resonated deeply with Jake. "That would be amazing, Elizabeth. We could help ensure that no one is unjustly penalized, that courage and compassion are recognized, not suppressed." They discussed the logistics, considering how they would structure the fund, the criteria for recipients, and how they would ensure the fund's sustainability over time. They decided that, in addition to personal contributions, they would seek support from external donors and perhaps even partnerships with organizations that valued social justice and equitable education. In the days that followed, Elizabeth used her legal connections and Jake his new academic ties to begin bringing the idea to life. They organized meetings with the university's financial department and presented their proposal to potential donors, who were receptive to supporting such a noble cause. At a launch event held at the university, attended by students, faculty, and community members, Jake had the opportunity to speak about the fund. In front of an attentive audience, he shared his story, emphasizing how adversity can be a catalyst for positive change. This fund represents more than financial assistance. It is a symbol of our belief in justice and the power of courageous action, Jake declared, with Elizabeth by his side, nodding in agreement. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and many in attendance expressed their support, some even offering to help. The scholarship fund was no longer just an idea, it was a tangible reality, ready to impact lives. As night fell over the campus, Elizabeth and Jake walked together, reflecting on the path they had traveled. The creation of the fund was not just a response to their struggles, it was a bridge to the future, a way to ensure that the values they had fought for would continue to positively influence the academic community. With the fund now established, they knew their work was not yet finished. There was much to be done to promote and sustain the fund, but for now, they could take pride in the legacy they were building, a legacy that would ensure that acts of courage and compassion were not only celebrated, but also properly supported. Following the establishment of the scholarship fund and the growing publicity around the changes Jake and Elizabeth had spearheaded, the college administration began to feel the pressure to review its own policies. The scandal that had been exposed and the consequent reforms proposed by Jake and Elizabeth catalyzed a movement within the institution itself for a revamp of disciplinary and admission norms. One sunny afternoon, the college called an emergency meeting with board members, faculty, and student representatives to discuss these changes. Jake was invited to attend and give his input, an acknowledgement of his central role in inciting these reforms. What we need is a system that not only punishes, but also understands and supports students, Jake argued during the meeting, facing an attentive auditorium. Every disciplinary case should be analyzed with a critical eye on the student's circumstances and motivations, ensuring we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Jake's words resonated with many in attendance, especially the students, who had long felt the need for a more compassionate and less punitive approach. "We completely agree, Jake," responded the new dean, who had replaced the former after the scandals. "We are implementing a review committee for disciplinary policies, which will include student and faculty representatives. We want to ensure transparency and fairness in all our procedures." The following weeks were a whirlwind of workshops, meetings, and discussion panels, all focused on transforming the college's culture. Policies were meticulously reviewed and rewritten, with special emphasis on restorative justice, psychological assistance, and academic support. Jake, now a prominent figure not only as a student, but also as an advocate for change, was often seen leading discussions or writing articles for the college newspaper about the importance of empathetic and inclusive education. "It's amazing to see the impact we're having," Elizabeth said to Jake as they walked across the revamped campus, now vibrant with posters for student campaigns and awareness events. "Yes, and to think it all started because someone dared to challenge the status quo," Jake replied, looking around with a sense of accomplishment. "Now I feel like we're really building something that will last, something that will make a difference." Their influence continued to grow, and their story became an inspiring legend on campus, told and retold among students as an example of the power of student voice and perseverance in the face of adversity. As the semester progressed, and the campus buzzed with the new energy of reform and renewal, Jake and Elizabeth knew they had sparked significant change. And as they prepared for the next stages of their academic and professional journeys, they reflected on how together they had transformed a moment of despair into an era of hope and justice for the entire student community. As Jake and Elizabeth's story spread, their influence extended beyond the confines of the campus and into a broader spectrum of society. What began as a personal struggle against injustices at a medical school had transformed into a symbol of resistance and positive change. As the end of the semester approached, they were flooded with invitations to attend conferences, workshops, and discussion panels across the country. Universities, civil rights organizations, and student groups wanted to hear directly from them about how they turned an adverse situation into a catalyst for educational reform. At one such occasion, a major conference on social justice in a large city, Jake found himself in front of an audience of hundreds of people, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and expectation. "When I was expelled, it felt like my world had collapsed," Jake began, the microphone transmitting his clear and firm voice across the wide room. But what seemed like the end was just the beginning. With the help of friends and allies, especially Elizabeth, we turned our struggle into an opportunity to seek justice, not just for one, but for all students. Elizabeth, beside him, added, "Our journey wasn't just about overcoming a personal obstacle. It was about shedding light on the shadows within our educational system and working to ensure that no future student faces the same kind of injustice." The audience's questions were many and varied, ranging from requests for advice on handling their own struggles to discussions about specific policies that could be implemented to prevent similar abuses at other institutions. "What do you recommend for someone facing similar challenges?" a young student asked, her voice trembling but determined. "First, never suffer in silence," Jake replied with conviction. "Find allies, document everything, and use the resources around you. Change begins when you decide to act." Elizabeth added, "And remember, the fight for justice is long and often difficult, but it is extremely necessary. Every small victory contributes to greater systemic change." After the conference, as Jake and Elizabeth packed up their materials and prepared for the next event, they reflected on the impact they were having. "Did you ever imagine we'd get this far when all this started?" Jake asked, a smile of disbelief forming on his lips. "Not at all," Elizabeth laughed, her gaze sweeping across the room, still buzzing with conversations sparked by their presentation. "But I'm incredibly grateful we did." As they continued to travel and share their story, the network of people influenced by their actions and dedicated to the cause of educational justice grew. They were paving the way for future generations of students, ensuring that the journey toward justice and truth continued, inspired by their own struggle and resilience. After months of traveling and lecturing, inspiring communities and institutions across the country, Jake and Elizabeth turned their attention to the more direct impact of their actions: the scholarship fund they had established. With the start of a new academic year, they were eager to see how the fund's recipients were taking advantage of the opportunities they had been given. One sunny afternoon, Jake and Elizabeth organized a meeting with the fund's first beneficiaries. The event took place in a cozy room within the university, decorated with motivational posters and vibrant artwork, creating an inspiring environment for meaningful discussions. As the students arrived, each with their own story of adversity and triumph, the energy in the room grew. Jake began the meeting with a few welcoming words. "We are here today not only to celebrate your achievements, but also to hear about your plans and how we can continue supporting you," he said, smiling warmly at the group. Elizabeth added, "Each of you was chosen because you demonstrated not only academic excellence, but also a commitment to justice and social change. We are here to help amplify your voices." One of the students, a young woman named Mariana, shared her experience. "This scholarship wasn't just financial aid for me. It was a sign that someone believes in my ability to make a difference. Now, I'm working on a project to help young people from underserved communities access quality education." Another scholarship recipient, a graduate student named Liam, spoke about his involvement in research focused on educational policies. "My goal is to influence public policies so that more students facing challenges have the same opportunities I had," he explained, clearly passionate about the subject. As each student spoke, Jake and Elizabeth listened attentively, taking notes and discussing possible ways to expand the fund to support even more student-led projects and initiatives. They knew that each success story was a testament to the power of community and solidarity. At the end of the meeting, they organized a photo session with all the scholarship recipients, promising to stay in touch and closely follow their progress and achievements. "You are the real change we want to see in the world," Elizabeth told them as they said their goodbyes. Leaving the meeting, Jake and Elizabeth felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had started something that was growing beyond their initial expectations, transforming lives and encouraging a new generation of leaders and activists. Walking back to their offices, they discussed plans for the coming year, including conferences for scholarship recipients and skills development workshops. "We're really building something lasting, Liz," Jake commented, a sparkle of pride and hope in his eyes. "Yes, we are," Elizabeth agreed, "and this is just the beginning. Let's keep pushing, learning, and growing together." And so, as the sun set over the campus, they carried on, aware that every small effort was contributing to a significant transformation in education and social justice, inspiring and being inspired by those whose lives they had touched. With the end of a hectic semester and the beginning of a quieter period, Jake and Elizabeth found a moment to sit down in a quiet cafe near the campus. The walls were adorned with vibrant local art, and the soft background music created an atmosphere conducive to introspection. As they savored their coffees, the conversation naturally drifted to the events of the past few months. They had traveled a path full of challenges and victories, a journey that profoundly transformed them both. "Have you ever stopped to think about how much we've changed since we started this journey?" Jake asked, looking pensively at the busy street outside. Elizabeth smiled, reflecting on the question. "It's true. It feels like just yesterday we were preparing for that first trial. And now look at us. We haven't just helped change the system, but we've changed ourselves." "And how do you think you've changed?" Jake inquired, genuinely curious about Elizabeth's perspective. "Well, I've learned to be more patient, to listen more. Before, I tended to want to resolve things quickly, but this experience taught me the value of understanding all aspects of a situation before acting," Elizabeth shared, stirring her coffee. "And you, Jake?" Jake thought for a moment before responding. "I think I've learned about the strength of vulnerability. Showing the world our struggles, our doubts, made me realize there's strength in opening up, and it connects us with others more than anything else." They both laughed a little, recognizing how these revelations seemed small, but were, in fact, profound transformations in their personalities and approaches to life and work. "I also think we've both learned a lot about compassion," Elizabeth added. "Seeing the stories of the students we've helped and understanding their struggles gave us a new perspective on the impact we can have." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "And it's amazing to think that, by trying to help others, we ended up helping ourselves too. We've grown together on this journey." The sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the cafe windows, and the moment seemed perfect for such reflections. They both knew that the experiences they had lived not only prepared them to face new challenges, but also transformed them into more effective advocates for justice and change. "What do you hope for the future, Elizabeth?" Jake asked, his voice filled with a mixture of expectation and serenity. "I hope to keep doing what we're doing, improving people's lives, learning and growing, and continuing our partnership, of course," she replied with a smile. "No doubt," Jake nodded, toasting with his cup to their partnership and the future. As they left the cafe, walking side by side under the deepening twilight, they both felt grateful for the path they had traveled and excited about the new horizons ahead. They had learned that together, they could face adversity and foster change, a lesson they would carry with them as they prepared for the next chapters of their lives. As twilight turned to night, Jake and Elizabeth continued their walk across the now nearly deserted university campus, reflecting on the path they had traveled together. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the sidewalks, illuminating their way as they talked about the future. "You know, Liz, thinking about everything we've been through really makes me believe we can face anything that comes our way," Jake said, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the night sky. Elizabeth smiled, agreeing with him. Yes, and we're not just reacting to what happens to us. We're now in a position to actively shape the future, not just for ourselves, but for others too. They stopped for a moment, looking at the university administration building, which had been the setting for so many crucial decisions in their lives. Remember when we were in there, feeling like the world was against us? Jake asked, his tone now lighter. How could I forget? Elizabeth laughed. But look at us now. We turned that struggle into something that really changed things here. And this is just the beginning, isn't it? Exactly, Jake replied, his gaze determined. We have a foundation, we have support, and most importantly, we have each other and our mission. We're going to keep pushing, not just here, but anywhere we can help. Elizabeth nodded, feeling a wave of emotion. I used to think justice was just a concept in law books, but we've experienced its true form by fighting for it. That gives me hope, not just for what we've already achieved, but for what we can still do. Yes, and we'll continue to inspire others, Jake said, beginning to walk again. Not just through the scholarship fund, but by being an example that adversity doesn't have to be an end, but a beginning for something greater. As they walked back to their apartments, the conversation turned to future plans. They discussed ideas for new projects, potential partnerships with other universities, and strategies to expand the reach of their social justice initiatives. I think the next big step could be a national, maybe even international, conference on educational justice and institutional reform, Elizabeth suggested, excited by the possibility. I love that idea, Jake agreed. Let's get it in motion. After all, if there's one thing we've learned, it's that there are no limits to what we can achieve when we're driven by passion and justice. The night had deepened, and the campus was quiet now, but for Jake and Elizabeth, it felt like the world was just waking up. With hearts full of optimism and determination, they knew that each new day brought an opportunity to continue their fight for a more just world. True courage, as they had learned together, was to persist no matter the adversity. With the close of this phase of their lives, they didn't see just an ending, but the beginning of a new era of impact and influence. And so, with firm steps and hopeful hearts, Jake and Elizabeth moved forward, ready for the challenges and triumphs the future would surely bring.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.